All right, you got less than an hour. So thanks to me.
Do we have that?
Thanks to me showing up late. Oh, look at that. We got the old timepiece going.
We got
hour
the
clock.
hour clock, the hourglass.
It's been a minute before I've seen that hourglass go. I mean, well, it's a 60-minute hourglass, but it's been a while since I've used that. I thought that thing got retired.
No, it's in effect.
Well, we're back. I feel like, we've seen each other a handful of times in the past couple of months here.
That's unexcusable.
It is unexcusable.
Bullshit.
Unacceptable. But they've all been great. No
Yes,
question.
they have.
And we've been doing a lot in the meantime. Absolutely a lot.
Yes, we have. Particularly, well, actually, both
of us. There's no
Truly,
question.
You know,
The
like
two
I
of
was
us.
going to say, oh, you had a kid, but I got married.
You
so
got
that's
married?
kind of like a significant thing.
That is a very significant thing, especially considering your past, right?
Yes, indeed.
That's a big one.
Yes, indeed.
I want to talk. Obviously, we've reopened for the final part of the year, Fit for Service, and I definitely want to dive into that. I want to dive into community. I want to dive into everything that's happening in the world right now. But definitely, let's just jump right in. Let's catch people up to. I know you just released a podcast with Ilana on Aubrey Marcus podcast. For my listeners, speed people up here, because this is for a lot of people that have been just watching through social media or not quite getting the full picture. Bring us up to speed.
Well, I think this really starts. I'll start when I was monogamous for most of my life, and I'm just not one of those individuals that has the temperament that I can be unfaithful. Like, cheating on my partner is just not an option. Now, part of it is kind of my moral stance, but part of it is just the absolute anxiety and stress I feel from having to hold something secret. I mean, I've done it one time in my life, and it was a fucking nightmare. It was such a nightmare that I was like, that's it. Never again will I ever hold a secret in, because it was burning me up. It was like tearing me up inside. So understanding that, I would go through these cycles of kind of serial monogamy. And I had other relationships with other, that lasted a little longer. But for the most part, I just needed that kind of novelty and that frequency of somebody new, partly because what I ultimately ended up finding is that I needed that validation. I needed somebody who didn't love me to start loving me, so I could be redeemed through their eyes and say, oh, wow, I am lovable. I'm a real man, and I needed that from other people. And part was just the enjoyment of meeting somebody else. I love people. So understanding that, I read Chris Ryan's book, and I'm sure you've talked about this a bunch. I understood that philosophically, in a tribal culture, they had a lot of different ideas about sexuality, and things were shared. Everything from the food was shared, the wealth was shared, the kill of the buffalo was shared, and many times the sexual rights were shared. And that's something that goes on to this day. So I was like, all right, fuck it. Like, I'm going in. And so I told Whitney, who was my partner then, and we were monogamous for about 18 months. I was like, look, I got to do this, and I would love for you to join me on this journey. She's like, fuck you. Peaced out. I started seeing somebody. She was seeing a couple different people, but we realized we loved each other, gave it a go. No respect for polyamory at all. I thought, like, philosophically, I understand this. Love should not be contained. Love should not be owned. It's free. Nobody should control anybody else's pleasure. I got this. And then I would see somebody, and Whitney would be fucking torn up inside, and I'd be like, what is wrong with you? Like, we agreed.
You said yes.
You said yes. And then fast forward, she starts seeing somebody. I'm crawling around on the ground, not knowing whether to vomit or punch a wall or cry for days on end. And I'm like, oh, I get it. This is harder than I thought it was. That continued in various different stages, with us not only having, the ability to explore people sexually, but with our hearts and loving each other, which was actually even harder. So that goes on, that entire learning experience, and the beauty of it, and also the deep, deep challenge of it. And I wouldn't change a minute of that. I mean, I'm just so grateful that Whitney had the courage to join me in that journey, and also the sovereignty to actually allow me to sit in the challenge and in the struggle of it. But then I started to kind of feel, as I started to love myself more, need validation less, I started to feel a calling for, instead of spreading that energy outward to many different people, to just see if I could find a person and just go deeper. And when I met Vi, who's my wife, Ilana, that was like, it was just really clear. We did a ketamine meditation together. It felt like our souls merged, and it happened fast. I mean, it was as somebody I'd known for 4 years, and we had a really deep friendship. So it wasn't like I didn't know her at that point.
Yeah, you had a deep friendship. There's obviously attraction there, no doubt about that.
No doubt about that.
No doubt about that. But yeah, the soul merger is kind of when things set off the rapid pace to, we can no longer ignore this, like taking the red pill.
No. And I've never been more sure of anything, you know, and that's the thing. It's like, it takes me oftentimes a lot of time and, you know, analyzing things and looking from the outside. But when I'm sure, I go all the way. And that was just what I did here. I was like, I'm sure and I'm ready. And she was ready as well. And it's been unbelievably beautiful. And it's had its challenges, but ultimately it's been one of the most healing things that I've ever experienced. So for me, I think the polyamorous journey was one of the most instructive things. It was one of the things that taught me the most about myself and revealed the most about me and tempered me, you know, like steel in the forge with the hammer of every person Whitney was sleeping with and every person she fell in love with, more heat, more fire. And I got stronger and I started to forge a blade where I could really handle my own emotions a lot better. But there was a lot of damage as well, you know, like all of that heat, all of that pressure. And with this container, which is just this deeply loving partnership and union, so many of these other things have healed. Things about my physical health have healed, my mental, emotional health. I've never been happier. And it's really like one way has been the absolute best way for me to learn. And this has been the best way for me to heal. And I genuinely believe the best way for me to give the rest of my gift to the world with that kind of support. Now, will it have its challenges? Of course it will. You know, like I still love people. You know, it's not like I'm going to be looking out and be like, yeah, all other people suck. No, they don't. All other people are awesome. But this is worth it, you know, and it's just about deciding what's worth it for whichever phase of your life. And I'm confident for this next phase of my life, like this is the way for me.
Yeah, I love that, brother. And I think, you know, I remember talking to Duncan Trussell, who I had heard had an open marriage, and they had a child on the way. And when we sat down on podcast, he was like, "Oh, we're not open now." You know, he was like, "Fuck all these labels." You know, like that was the thing we were doing, and then now we're monogamous, and I don't even fucking care to say that we're monogamous now. Like we don't have other partners now. It's just us, and then in the future, that'll fucking change. And then it did change in the future, and it's like this just ever flow of what they're doing now, and who gives a shit about what that label is. You know, I'm sure you've heard that in ancient Greece, they didn't even have a word for homosexuality. If men fucked men, it just fucking happened. It was sex. It wasn't, you know, this is dude on dude, this is dude on girl, this is girl on girl. It was none of that. It was just, this is making love.
You know, in ancient Rome, they also had a lot of man on man sex, but there was a slur for the guy who took it in the butt. Like you could call somebody that guy. And I remember like it would be scribbled on the walls. Like when Caesar came in and like claimed the emperorship of Rome, some people were mad, you know, they were mad that he did. So they would write the slurs like Caesar takes it in the ass on like those graffiti on the walls.
Caesar's a bottom.
Caesar's a bottom. And that would be a slur, which is also totally silly, you know, but there's like, it's funny how, so Greece had nothing. Rome had like, yeah, it's all cool. But you know, if you're a real man, you know, you're the top,
you're not
you know, so it's all these just like sequences of biases. And then like you have somebody like Jason Ellis, who's a lot more enlightened. And it's like, yeah, not being the bottom is like surfing and saying like, no, I don't want to barrel the wave. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that sounds like a much more.
I'm going to boogie board instead. I think it's cooler.
Yeah. That's like a way more enlightened perspective. But I think there's so much shit that's attached to all of these things when it's just people loving each other and experiencing pleasure. And I think the world would be served by just removing all of these labels and containers and biases and slurs and judgments, just being like, let's do this. Let's fucking do human and figure it out.
Yeah, it's funny to me how much my experience has mirrored yours. Not in the exact timeline, but pretty fucking close.
Yeah.
Really, really close. You know, we, through the influence of Chris Ryan and others, and then of course through you know, being my best friend, like we're like, yeah, all right, this makes sense. And then actually through the push from psilocybin and the journey we were in together to start open relationship for our own growth. And, you know, to create tribe. And you've got our tribe beads on right now. And it's something I want to talk about as we dive into community. But really, I didn't, you know, in my mind, it's funny because you think about things like, I'm sure when you started on it, you thought you'd be CEO until the very end, or maybe you didn't, right? But you have like a picture of how it's going to look, and that shifts over time. And I thought like, all right, this is what we're doing now. and we're not going back. And there's no right or wrong path. They're both good. They're both fine, but this is what we're going to do until the end. And, fast forward 2.5 years later, and it's like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I got all my lessons. It's almost like fighting. I was the hammer and the nail enough times to realize that I've received 90% of the lessons. And if I want the 100% of the lessons, I'm not going to have a brain by the end of this. Right. So if I want the other 10% of the lessons I can extract from open relationship, I might not have a wife, I might not have a lot of things. And I just think about that. Like we also were forged in the fire, and what's so comical is Paul checks. And there's a, I don't know if Ryan can see that. There's a beautiful mandala that he sent you, and he sent me one around the same time. And, Paul's a special human. He just tuned into us at that time, but we hadn't spoken. It was right when we started open relationship. And he goes, see if this painting I made for you guys resonates. And it's a 12-pointed star, but in the middle, it's just logs and a fire burning. It's just fire. Mm-hmm. And he titled it Being Together. And I was like, get the fuck out of here, man. Yeah. So I was like, we got to talk now. So I let him know, hey, we just started this and it's well beyond what I thought I was signing up for.
Oh yeah.
And just, and that's just, I'm just saying that to say that we didn't stop doing it because of the challenges involved or the fact that it is harder than we thought on paper. Through doing it, we actually got better at it. We not only got better at being in relationship with others, but we got better at being in relationship with each other, which is really what it was all about to begin with. But in seeing that, the desire for others has really fallen away, and I think about that, like the purpose of us doing open relationship was really to bring us together further and to help us understand where are the cracks in our own relationship? Where are the cracks in our own psyche? Like, how can we navigate the world and what is the stress and the pressure and the thing that's actually going to cause us to grow that nothing else can really touch on? Something you mentioned to me, like ayahuasca, it has an endpoint. Iboga has an endpoint, and that pressure of those is unmatched, arguably, in plant medicines. But maybe set aside the 30-gram dose. But when you think about that, they always have an endpoint. This thing just keeps going and going as long as you're in it, and that pressure keeps building. And I think about that. Thankfully, we had people like yourself, people like Dr. Dan Engel, people like, Chris Ryan, that, it's a loaded max effort negative. It's more than we can handle, but we've got people on both sides of us lifting that weight back up when we come up. And I think that's been a critical piece in our journey, but very much, we're right in line there. Like, let's get on this divine union. Let's see how deep we can take this within each other, and let's practice some of this cool shit Jamie Wheel's talking about. Let's talk about that and start thinking about different ways we can create these altered states of consciousness upon orgasm, marrying sex magic with tantric, and see where that takes us for novelty, for, reaching God consciousness and altered states, in sex, like all kinds of cool stuff on the table there. But it's been a fucking wild ride, dude.
No doubt.
A wild ride.
No doubt. I think for anybody who's looking to try it, I think I still recommend it. I still recommend it as like one of the greatest learning tools that's available. It's a fire, but if you're ready for the fire, like I strongly recommend it. My advice would be that really you still have to have just an unwavering commitment to your primary in order for it to be like productive. Because if everything you're doing with the end goal being this is going to strengthen our primary relationship, and I think you got to get to a point where you're willing to fold all other cards to the ace. And if you're in that place, I think it's also going to be incredibly strengthening for the relationship, where that at any given point that either one of you guys could throw up the towel or throw up a finger and be like, I'm not feeling it. You're like, cool, everything else is done.
Yeah, and respect that.
And respect that, and just know that the primary reason that you're doing this is to strengthen the partnership. I think in that case, it can be even more productive for the relationship container as well. And then I think looking ahead to the future, this is something you mentioned, as like tribe and community gets strengthened, and really you have that sense where you really are mimicking what anthropologically and what a lot of other tribal cultures have, which is everybody collectively working towards a common goal, sharing everything, collapsing these boundaries through all the rites of passage and all the vulnerability that you share. I think in that kind of container, I think polyamory is going to be a very common thing, but in the wide world where we are now, where there is no real sense of tribe, and then people are just kind of sussing out whether the person they're with is their partner or whether they're 100% in or not. It's treacherous, still incredibly valuable to learn, but it's going to be really difficult to pull off, if you want to have that sustained union.
Yeah. It's a tough piece. I think, I don't know if I think it might've been Tim Ferriss. He was talking about the fact that everyone that he's ever seen go through this has failed in some way to make it work. Right. And while it's easy to sit on the outside and say that can be true, certainly if my marriage had ended with Tosh, I would consider that a failure on some level, to some degree, right? Because that was the thing that we had in mind of keeping. And so had that failed, had we had a broken home where, kids have to split time with us, yeah, I'd call that a failure on some sense. But at the same time, everything's a win if you're learning from it. If I'm not holding on to the bitterness of what once was, but I'm actually drawing from that as, damn, that was the hardest thing that ever happened, and it ended this relationship, and now I have all these pieces to pick up and move forward. As long as I pick them up and move forward, I've actually transformed that into a lesson that I can take with me. Yeah. So I'm not sure that failure exists in any of those things, right? Certainly we could qualify the ending of the primary as failure, and thankfully that hasn't happened with us. But I just think, if we reframe everything that we're doing into what is my draw from this? What have I gained from this? Not what can I gain, but what actually did I gain from this? There's always something there. Even the hardest ceremonies, there's always something there.
If you're open to it, absolutely. Reminds me, I saw a poem from NQ recently, and he was saying, one day my wife is going to send all of my former lovers flowers as thank you for making me the man I am today. And that's really the case. Like, I can send all of Vailana's former partners and all of actually Whitney's other partners because of this polyamorous construct. Like, they were teachers for me, so thank you, thank you for all that. And Vi the same way to Whitney and to everybody else, like those proverbial flowers, and maybe actually physical flowers at some point. It's not a bad idea, but though that just gratitude for providing the forge, so that I can be the man I am today, and that Vi can be the woman she is today, that you can be who you are, Tosh can be who she is, that everybody can be who they are. If you look at it like that, like everything is gratitude.
Yeah, there's in the notes a book we've read more than once, but in the Fifth Sacred Thing, they talk about that water blessing. Bless all the sacred streams that flow into this river who have made the river. Yeah. Right? Like, every person you've ever been with is a stream that flows into your river. Right. And they're talking about that from a sexual standpoint and beyond, but really it is the beyond. It's all the ways we're influenced. It's all the ways we learn. It's all the ways we grow from one another that contribute to the stream that is uniquely you. Mm-hmm. And that's such a cool way to kind of recapture, what it's been and what it is within yourself.
Yep. And, I think the key thing here, and I know we're going to bridge into community, but you have to have a strong community. You have to have people that you could just open up and share vulnerably. And when you're wrecked, be like, look, I'm fucking wrecked. And hopefully someone who can really see you and hold that and have gone through similar things. Like, that was so essential for both of us. Like, how many times did we walk around the building together? Even if we had almost no time during the day, you were like, all right,
107 degrees outside.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Holes in my feet.
Doesn't matter. Let's throw in a banger, throw in a snooze. We'll take this walk and we'll like share what's on our heart. And it wasn't even so much that either one of us were giving each other great advice all the time, but we could hear it, hold it, like see it. And just that feeling is so essential to have. And like, we need that for any challenge that we're dealing with, whether it's a professional challenge, personal relationship, whatever, like having people who can be there. I mean, I don't know how you go through life effectively without it. I don't think you can.
We're not meant to, and I think that's one of the biggest draws from Sex at Dawn for me, was understanding like, hey, collectively, we did this differently, right? And we did it differently, not only from a sexual standpoint, and it wasn't always the case for that, but we did it differently from, like you said, everything is shared, everything is gift economy, and even beyond that, like parenting, like anyone's a fucking parent. They're like, how does this work? I don't understand. Well, it's not supposed to work this way. The nuclear family isn't supposed to be nuclear. It's not supposed to be 2 parents and fucking 3 kids. They're supposed to have grandparents in the mix and aunties and uncles and everyone around. And, you know, tribes like the Hopi wouldn't even let the parents parent. They were too close. The grandparents taught the kids, and the parents were able to go out and work and do the things that they still didn't lose that part of themselves. So when they could return from their work of the day, it was for play. It wasn't for teaching or being, you know, the guidepost for your firstborn, secondborn children. It was to be simply, you know, the playmate, the person they could love, the person they could teach in different ways. But the bulk of that responsibility fell on the elders, the aunties, the uncles, and everyone was the parent. You know, plenty of tribes have one word for father and mother. And everyone, all the elders are called that. You've got 8 dads, you've got 10 moms, that kind of thing, you know, and everybody possibly could have been dad, you know? So you think about that, and it's just a different way of looking at it. And I think it's not to say, hey, we need to go out and fuck everybody and all live under one roof and start a commune or any of that stuff. It's just to say, like, how can we show up for one another in a way that's meaningful, where our shared experiences can be the leverage point to give people new perspective and help them out in anything that they're facing. And I think that's where community really is a difference maker, not just for those that are trying to traverse open, but for those who are in a rut in a fucking 19-year monogamous marriage, for those who have their firstborn and have no idea because there's no fucking script on how to raise a kid in a modern world, for people that lost their job during COVID and fucking don't know what they want to do next. You know, I mean, there is every possible angle for what we're going through as a culture right now. Can you support? All of it can. Yeah. And the best support is people who have experienced that. It's people who not only have read about it, but actually walk the walk. And I think that's the beautiful thing that you've created with Fit for Service, is something that not only, you know, it's not just a kind of a jack of all trades, but an ace in none. We've got aces in all trades and the ability to help others. And you think about, you know, what they're doing, what's the prerequisite when Rick Doblin is teaching people how to be licensed NBMA therapists. They have to fucking do it.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to have to go through that. It's not just read and learn with all the things to say. You have to been on the other side of that coin and experienced it for yourself. So with the people that we're pulling in, the like-minded individuals that have become members of Fit for Service, I think that is one of the ultimate offerings as a part of community. But I want you to touch on this more, because you've got a lot going on with your writing right now, and I definitely want to touch on that. But you're wearing our tribe necklace. Let's talk about what you had in mind when you wanted to recreate tribe, and let's see how that pertains to the community that you've really fostered here with Fit for Service.
It's interesting because as I'm writing this book, I'm talking about the importance of having these true allies in a community. That's one of the 12 steps of the mind on this journey. Like, we have to find our allies, and whether that's a romantic partner or a true friend, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a community, it's absolutely essential, because that's the person that's going to hold up that mirror for you and also be able to hold whatever else that you're going through, right? And hopefully provide that expertise that you're talking about, like be that ace in that particular category that you can reach out to and be like, all right, what's going on? You know, like if I have something I'm, you know, trying to figure out with my diet or with like human optimization, it's an easy first call to you. And I'm like, hey, Kyle, what's up? And then there's multiple different calls. Maybe it's Dr. Conover, or maybe it's Dr. Saladino, or maybe it's, you know, there's so many different people we have. We have aces. And then we also just have our Ohana, our chosen family. And I think back to some of the hardest times in my life. And then that was just when I didn't have that. You know, I had actual family, like biological family. You know, I could talk to my dad, but he's from a radically different generation. And so we could talk philosophically and logically about things, but he didn't really know what I was going through. He couldn't feel it. He couldn't really hold that. You know, he did his best. So my mom, for sure, even more different, you know, although sports, she was a great athlete, so I could talk to her about sports stuff, but that ended pretty much out of high school, unless I was, you know, stressed about some intramural basketball I was playing, which I really wasn't. It was just fucking fun. So, and then what else? And then I had like a couple other friends that I partied with, and but I didn't have that. And so I felt fucking hella lonely, and I was surrounded by a ton of people, but just so lonely. And so it was so hard because I didn't feel like anybody could see me. And then I made that one first true ally. That was Bodie Miller. And that's when really my life changed radically. I had like one individual who could really see all the way through all the layers and see me and wasn't afraid to call me out on my shit or like provide another perspective. And that was like the first thing that changed it. And then slowly more and more people started to go, but really slowly. You know, it was slow at first. And then eventually things started to pick up momentum. You know, the more that you put out your message, it becomes like this lighthouse, and the lighthouse attracts more people who are interested in the same thing, interested in personal transformation, interested in all this. And then I think the culmination of that was when I was down doing Wachuma, which is the San Pedro cactus, and with Don Howard. And it's, of all the psychedelic medicines, it's perhaps the most tribe engendering, the most communal. Like ayahuasca, you're on your mat going through your own shit. And there's some stuff in the collective field for sure, but the lights are off. You don't see anybody. You're not interacting. You really just talk about it the next morning, you know, after you're done purging.
Closing circle.
Closing circle. Yeah. So you don't really get to connect in the medicine, in the process. Wachuma is totally different. And so you're going from the moment you take it in the middle of the day, you know, and everybody's going through that ceremony. You're there with each other. You go out, explore the tribes, go swim in the sacred stream, come back on the boats, go back into the Maloka, experience like the second part of the ceremony around the mesa, and you're just looking in each other's eyes and participating together. And the sense of community that I felt with the people that I was going through that Wachuma with really made me realize, like, okay, like I see now how these different transformational tools can then expand the opportunity to bring people who are kind of close to a lot closer together. And that's when this original like seed of the idea for Fit for Service came in my mind. Like, we can get people who are pretty close and then go through a journey together. And at the end of the journey, we're not going to be pretty close. We're going to be really close. And then there's going to be a tribe. And maybe that tribe doesn't all live in the same city, but they're there. And I think that's the advantage of the digital communication we have. Certainly it has its downfalls, but we have the ability to stay in touch with people all around the world at all times, just with some intentional effort. So as we see with the Fit for Service crew, it's the WhatsApp channel. It's going to be actually the native app that we're developing as well, where people can communicate at all times. The Slack channels, the private Instagram pages, whatever else you can do, Facebook groups, however you want to do it, or just text chains. You know, like I know we all have different groups of text chains where you just stay in touch. Like the group that I went through those initiations in Poland with, you know, going into the cold, doing the breath work. And breath work is a way to bring out so many emotions as well. It's probably the most psychedelic of the non-plant medicine, non-substance rituals that you can do.
And the easiest to access, right?
Absolutely.
It's free. You always have it. That's
Absolutely.
Just like Wim Hof said, you know, it's just a matter of not only knowing the entry point, but having someone to guide you through that. And it's awesome you're bringing that up, because that is what's on the table here in our final summit for the year in Sedona, you know, with Anahata, you know, one of our beautiful teachers.
The maestro of breath.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful experience. I mean, I've seen, and we've both seen and facilitated some of the most radical transformations of any ceremonies, honestly. You know, people like where their hearts just absolutely crack open, and people who haven't breathed in that kind of shamanic breathing and Wim Hof taken to the extreme. If you haven't gone there, you may be like, yeah, whatever, breath. All right.
I was like, all right, okay. People are saying like John Wolfe, people I respect. They're like, they say it's dope. So I'm going to do it, but I'm still looking at it kind of like, you know, now I get to roll with a blue belt instead of a black belt. You know, like the ayahuascas, the ibogas, the large, you know, mushroom ceremonies, like that's going to remain in its own spot. And breath will be cool. It'll be cool because I'll get to learn about it and talk about it for people who maybe don't have the balls to go where I'm going, right? And then it's like, oh, fuck, like I'm having full-blown visions here, full-blown visions.
Yeah,
you know?
and like, you know, shaking, clenched up, and then releasing, and just the tears and the re-experiencing of, you know, your own sense of self-love and identity and any trauma that you've carried. It's just the ultimate shakeout of the entire system, and that allows everything that's been stuck in the the crags and the cracks in your psyche and the shadows to just burst through and come out, whether that's anger, some people howling like wolves and screaming in rage, some people crying, some people silently like in the peace and joy of the moment. There's so many things that happen in that experience. So knowing that we could create these without having to go down to Peru and take a bunch of plant medicines, maybe someday when it's all legal, we'll all be able to do that. But for now, there's so many powerful transformational experiences, from the Temescal, the sweat, the heat, the prayer, the breath, the ecstatic dance, all of the different practices that we layer in for the community. The result is, I'd hoped that it would yield this, but it's been so much more. I mean, the group that starts off like, yeah, all right, these people seem kind of cool. Then by the end, it's like, fuck, this is family. Like, this is absolutely family. And we've been in the room when people have shared some stuff that's like, holy shit, like you were carrying that. And they'll just open up and share these things with the entire group, and the whole group will rally in love, no matter if they were perpetrator or victim of something that, from an outside perspective, from that casual judgment, we're like, wow, that's fucking heinous. But the group is there to receive it and then hold that in love. And doesn't mean it's absent of either condemnation or, excusability or justification. It's absent of either. It's just that kind of non-committal, like, we love you no matter what. And that's what provides the healing. Just seeing people go through these different healings, it's been really fucking phenomenal, man. I mean, and that's why we were talking before this podcast, like, Fit for Service for me it's a forever thing. It's like, it's so valuable, not just for the people, but for us to be a part of that and to know that there's this revolving group that's ever expanding. Because once anybody who's been in it, they're still the same way. They're still in touch with everybody. They're still communicating. It's like we're creating this larger and larger network, and they're starting their own groups, and it's creating this kind of ripple effect. And when I look out with optimism at the world, like, this is one of the big things, is that people starting to form tribes again, groups where they can just absolutely feel like this is my chosen family. And that's the beauty of what this is. It's that proof of concept from that thing that I'd kind of felt and needed when I was younger, intuited and understood when I went through the Wachuma with Don Howard. And now we've actually created at relative scale with Fit for Service. And of course, we're limited to that 150 person number, that Dunbar number, which is like the maximum amount of people you can really feel bonded in a tribe. So it can't be for the whole world, but hopefully it gives people this inspiration to form their own 150. And that 150, every person there forms their own 150 or whatever, 12. It doesn't even need to be 150, right? It can be at whatever scale you want to develop it. It could be fucking 3. But either way, like, feeling that sense of belonging and that sense of tribe, that's going to change everything. That's that, along with all of the transformational practices and medicines. So yeah, as fucking gnarly as shit may look out there in the world, there's some really powerful ways to kind of correct all of that as it spreads. And I see that happening.
Yeah. It's funny how paradoxical life is in the land of duality, but as we see shit hit the fan and probably every facet externally, in tandem, I've never felt better internally. And I know that that resonates strongly with you. And I know there's a lot of people in our group that resonate with that as well because of the community you've formed. One thing Fit for Service has done for me is fighting for me gave me a burning desire to learn more. And because it would show up in fights. Like, if I don't learn this thing, it's going to result in me possibly getting my ass kicked. And I just went wherever intuition took me, into mobility, into cold therapy and Wim Hof breathing, into all these different avenues, largely based on performance, but also, breath work led into meditation and different aspects of how do I quiet the monkey mind when I've got someone trying to kill me, those kind of things too, right? And I've never really experienced that since. I mean, both of us have podcasts, both of us enjoy sharing via the podcast as we are right now, because we know it's touching people. We know it's getting through to people. And through the comments we get on Instagram or on, whatever Podbean, we can see that it's working. Or, we run into somebody in Santa Monica and they're like, dude, the episode you did on blah, blah, blah completely changed my life and I lost 100 pounds, or this happened and that happened. And it's like, wow, okay, that's cool. It is working. But that's a little bit delayed compared to what we see in Fit for Service. And that, to me, has been the single thing, the single spark that has ignited me to passionately follow anything that I'm guided towards. And it's not, I want to learn everything to spit out everything. That's not mastery anything. That's, mastery of everything is mastery of nothing, something like that. I'm butchering that.
Makes sense to me.
But, I think what I'm getting towards is, in fighting, I just let my intuition guide me to what was the next important thing. And fighting was the fire that made me do that. And Fit for Service is the fire that keeps that going right now. Right. And it's not that I need to, people are having problems with this, so I'm going to read this book and try to digest it for them. No, it's not it at all. In a way, it is very much my own self guiding me towards stuff that I want to know. But in doing that, and in you doing that for yourself, and Godzi doing that for himself, and Caitlin doing that for herself, that medicine trickles out into this community at a rapid pace. And the beautiful thing is to be able to see that ripple in real time. It's to be able to see and not just hear about it, but feel it in the hug, but know it in the whimper, in the communication, in the cry that comes out as people open up. Yeah. To actually see that very viscerally and feel it deep inside us, that knowing that whatever we're working towards and whatever we're collectively working towards, it actually does matter. It actually is changing lives. And that's exceeded my expectations tenfold.
Yeah, no doubt. I was talking to Vi, and she's gone through, and anybody listen to my podcast with her on my show, she'd gone through a lot of hardship, a lot of challenge in her life. And she'd kind of kept most of that to herself and really kind of held that to herself. And as she's been exposed to the Fit for Service community and started working with people, and also through the podcast and different people, I was explaining like the ultimate alchemy, the thing that makes anything that you've gone through worth it. Step one, you learn for yourself and you have the gratitude for what it taught you. But the step two of this alchemy that really makes it complete and makes it really worthwhile is when you can share all of the lessons of every pain that you've gone through, and someone else can look in your eyes and be like, I experienced the exact same thing. Oh, that sexual violation, that happened to me. And like, you can hold that for them and be like, I went through the same thing, and then hold that for them and see how your experience can make them feel seen and connected and not alone. And like, that's the ultimate alchemy and that's, I think, one of the reasons why being of service is so valuable and so important, is because it provides the alchemy of every hardship that you've ever gone through. Because when you can go through it and you've made it through, then you can help somebody else make it through their own. And, they're going to, help somebody else make it through their own. And it becomes this chain of events that's incredibly valuable. And, every different thing, whether it's actually literal, the exact experience you went through, or just the forging from all of those cumulative experiences that you can bring, every set of skills you have. And it becomes like something that I think is the most pleasurable thing we can access. We think of the most pleasurable things. Well, for my birthday this last year, I decided I was going to facilitate breath work with Anahata. Why? Because like I was being absolutely altruistic? No, that was a part of it. But another part of it is it just feels the best for me when I can be a part of someone else's growth and transformation. Like what that does for me, like there's no way to give a gift and not receive at the same time. It's not possible. So like, if you think that you're being selfless, like, yeah, in a way you're helping somebody, but it's the absolute greatest gift that you can give yourself is to be of service. It starts again, and that's why we call it Fit for Service. It starts with you, but the act of being of service to somebody else is going to be the thing that is going to be the greatest gift to you as well. So that's another aspect that I think people are denied. You can get so locked in this thing where you're not offering nearly a fraction of your gift to the world, so you're not receiving nearly a fraction of the reward back.
Yeah, there's a brilliant article that someone just wrote on the Rolling Stone. I'll link to it in the show notes, or Ryan, I'll send it to you and have you link to it in the show notes. Yes, I love saying that. It's been a hot minute. We will have show notes for this episode. They talk about the breakdown of America, and that's stemming really from an idea of the 50s that may or may not have ever really taken place, to the pushback against the 60s and the 70s, and the push for individuation, the push for the individual, the push for self-realization, and not in the sense of the self-realization we're talking about, the self-realization they talk about in the Vedanta treatise, self-realization in the sense of like all the accolades of being wealthy, all the accolades of, whatever success is measured by the Western model mind can put around that. Then that push really was what drove us away from community. It's what drove us away from having multi-generational families and shipping off grandparents to elderly homes. It's what broke down a greater sense of purpose. And Paul Chek, I'll link to this as well, since I got Ryan here, the I, we, all model of love, which he has, I think, a 4-part series on YouTube that absolutely expanded my mind. Kids go through this I phase, and there's a lot of kids that grow up and wear adult suits that are still fucking big kids, and they still look at it through the I model. How can I be served? Me, more. And you shift, that consciousness grows to the we model. Who is my one-on-one relationship right now that I actually care about just as much as I care about myself? And if we continue to develop, that consciousness does shift to the all. And then all can mean very different things. It can mean the all of my, extended family. It can mean the all of my community and where I live. It can mean the all of, the nation that I'm in, or it can be the whole world. It can be the entire cosmos, the multiverse, however far you stretch that all, that's what it can encompass. And I think the more we start to touch on service to the all, the more not only do we develop personally, but the more meaning and purpose our life has. Like, it's so fucking gratifying to have something that matters more than yourself, and to have a means of how to affect that, right? It's not enough to say the world is broken, this is all going to shit, what's going to happen to the economy, how are we going to die next? It's to actually have like-minded people that are doing the work to spitball ideas off of, and to come up with real-world solutions that affect people on an individual basis right now, to be the change you wish to see, right?
Yeah. It goes against some aspects of human nature to expand it to everything. And I think not against, but it's a stretch. It's a big stretch, because I think we are wired to care about that much about our chosen family, our ohana, our tribe, right? And that's why that Dunbar number exists. It becomes a lot more challenging. You really have to have an amazing spiritual grounding and an imagination to really see everybody as you, beyond the judgments, as our friend Ted Decker says, like, the love that holds no record of wrong. Like, there is no judgment in love. And like Paul Selig is always talking about, like, don't put somebody in the cave of your judgment, because you're just going to be there, right there with them the moment that you're judging them, because at the universal truth, that person you're judging is you living a different life. It's still you. So you can't judge you and not be in judgment yourself. It's not possible. But that requires like just a big leap from what we're like wired and programmed to be. And that is, I think, the ambition of, that we all should have, is to get ourselves to the place where we transcend our biology. Like, our biology is great, let's celebrate it, but we can also intentionally work to transcend it with our spiritual understanding and our philosophical understanding of the world. And I think that's what very few people that we can look at it feels like they've really achieved. Ram Dass is one of them. I was able to see Don Miguel Ruiz and know that, like, wow, it is possible. I've seen somebody who lived like that. And it's a great goal to have. But at the baby steps, just feel that way about anybody. Like, use any single relationship you have. And that's another thing that Ram Dass talks about. Use any relationship you have where you can look at them truly the same as you look at yourself, and look at them without judgment. Practice all of that unconditional love with anybody. Use that as a lever to pry you into the ability to start to practice. I got it with my wife. Cool. Now let me try with a slightly larger group. Okay, cool. I'm kind of getting it. And then a little larger group, and then a little larger group. And I think that's the progression. The progression is just find it with somebody. And if you don't have anybody, of course, start with yourself. I don't think you can achieve it without actually having that same unconditional self-love. It's hard to have that with anybody, but you can also use an individual to help spring you into that radical self-love for yourself as well. Like, it's sometimes easier to love another individual more unconditionally than you love yourself, especially I imagine with kids,
Yeah.
like you can really love them without judgment. But when you look at yourself, you have judgment. But anything that you have that you can love in that kind of radical, unconditional way, like know that that's an incredibly valuable thing, because that can be the lever to spring you into this more integral level of consciousness.
I love that. And I love the example you use on kids, because it's funny. As many have stated, you can only love someone else as much as you love yourself. The same is true for compassion. You can only have as much compassion for someone else as you have for yourself. And when my inner critic is strong, I'll have to remind myself, because my inner critic comes out to criticize others. And if I'm super hard or just on Bear's ass about anything, and Tasha's like, hey, is everything all right? And it's like a gentle reminder of like, oh yeah, here I am being ultra strict, and like, oh, wait a minute. He's only 5 years old. Like, yes, of course, he's a 5-year-old. What? Oh yeah. Like there's like a wake up, a moment of, and then why? All right, let me meditate on this. Oh, my ducks aren't in a row internally. My mind is fucking all over the place right now on the inside. And I've got a lot of inner judgment going on too. So maybe if I start to unpack that and surrender to all that is and move from the mind down into my body, then that'll be reflected upon him and everyone else that I'm around. And it is, there's an old football quote, yard by yard, life is hard, but inch by inch, life's a cinch. And I love that, because you can read a book, any of these great spiritual books, and they talk about, one of my favorites from the Bhagavad Gita is enter into a state of samadhi as many times as necessary until you begin to see God in all things. Right? But you can bridge that.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to just go from, all right, I love my wife, and now I'm fucking one with everything in the sacred hoop. All my relations, I see it all.
Yeah.
You don't quite make that jump in one whack, right? It does take time, but I think with what you're organizing within this group and how that continues to evolve and continue to manifest in very real world, practical experiences that we bring to people, not just on paper, not just through word, but through self-experience and direct experience, direct knowing, that is starting to change people at a rapid way. All at the same time, you've been writing your next book. Which is fucking
hypothetically writing my next book.
Talk about that. Talk about what's going into that, and really how that's mirroring your thoughts around what Fit for Service is and what it's becoming.
Well, writing this book is really interesting, because when I wrote my last book, I had so much ego motivation that was still present. Like I wanted to be a New York Times bestseller. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to, have this big book tour. And it was like right in the throes of polyamory. I had 3 girlfriends and I wanted 4 at least.
I'm going to fuck everybody. Get me on tour.
Yeah. So like this motivation was a good part of what got my butt in that seat, and was like, I'm going to fucking do this. And I'm going to crush it. I'm going to kill it. When people read these pages, they're going to learn so much that they're going to just be filled with this passion for me. But it was about me a lot. And yes, it was about serving with the right information, because that was the vehicle that I could reflect so much of that, adulation back upon myself. And that was, a lot of that happened subconsciously too. It's not like I was thinking about that, but I could feel that being the motivation. Things have shifted. My ego is not as hungry for validation anymore. I love myself so much more radically that it's not dependent upon these external things like you talked about in the 50s. Like it's not dependent upon what I accomplish and what I do to make me feel better about myself. And now that I'm in a monogamous sacred union, it's not going to get me laid, this book, right? And On It is doing incredibly well. It's not about the money that the book is going to bring either. So it's a purity of purpose with this book, which is great, which is the way. This is the future. This is the way that the rest of my life is going to be organized. But it's like I had a dirty, coal burning fuel source of my own ego and my own desire for the sensual pleasures of the world. And now that engine's like, okay, that engine's offline. Now you only have like the solar powered, love generated, altruistic desires to create the best book for the world, period. And I'm sure there's still a little ego, and there's little sputtering coal engines that are flying in like Guardians of the Galaxy and giving me a little push here or there. But for the most part, it's like a real purity of purpose. And for a while there, I was kind of wrestling with that, because it's just it's an adaptation, and I'm just settling into engaging in this giant project. with that in mind. And the most valuable practice of that is to just imagine the reader and really make it concrete. Because I think one of the issues is when these are just an Instagram handle or kind of a nameless, faceless person, it's hard to like really give a shit about them enough. Of course I care, but if you don't know anybody, it's like if you watched a movie, imagine you watch Braveheart and you didn't get to know Murren, right? William Wallace's first wife, well, his only wife, but you didn't get to know Murren before she was killed. Right? You didn't get to know it. Well, you wouldn't really have that same visceral reaction that sets you up in this revenge lust for the rest of the movie. Like, get him, Wallace, get him. You wouldn't feel that unless you really like got to see Murren and you got to love her. And all good movies know that. Like, you got to like get inside somebody and really see them and know what they're about. And then you really care about helping them. So for me, what the practice has been is just every day when I sit down to write, imagining a different reader, and I'll give them a name: George, Ashley, Zach, Lauren, whoever else. And I'll just think about them reading the book and think about them and their life and everything they've gone through, and know that my words in some way have to be medicine for them. And that's the only way that I've been able to get through the writing that I have so far. And it's the only way that I'm going to be able to get through this book. And it's absolutely the right way. This is the way, as the Mandalorian, says, like, this is the way, is to really write with that purity of purpose. And so, I'm grateful to be in the spot that I'm at. It's definitely has its own set of challenges, again, because I'm missing that, dirty fuel source, that push where I can be like, well, all right, but someday I'm going to be sitting on top of a nightclub somewhere and just be like, yeah, what's up, everybody? Like that's gone. And, but again, it just goes back to that radical love for those that you're serving. And if you have that, there's no greater motivation than that. Like any of these other motivations that you have, they can be temporary. They can give you a little push. And I'm not saying don't use them. I used them to great success, especially when they're bent to noble means, like you're doing a noble thing and you're trying to gain the accolades from those noble things that you're doing. But nonetheless, it's still an impure fuel source. Like the purest fuel source is that radical love. And to get to that radical love for the people you don't even know, then you have to use your imagination. You have to create that story in your head about who you're serving and care about that person so much that you almost are ready to cry for their story that you've made up in your own head. And if you're ready to cry for them and you're ready to bleed for them, you'll sit your ass in that chair and you'll put those words out, or whatever your project is or whatever you're trying to offer. If you're creating a product, like think about that person that product is serving. Any post that you make, think about that person who needs that more than anything that day. And that's going to give you the motivation and overcome all of that resistance. And that's really kind of what I've been practicing and learning through this book writing process. But it's been a beautiful beast, man.
Incredible, brother.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're out of time. Let's talk here real quick. Aubrey Marcus podcast. Obviously, I'm sure everybody listening to my show listens to yours. Outside of that, aubreymarcus.com/FFS. Is that right?
Fit for Service.
Fit for Service, all spelled out. We'll link to that. That'll be the first thing linked to in the show notes. So you can just one-click it there. Open enrollment right now for the next couple of weeks. So make sure you sign up if you want to be a part of this. And if not, continue to draw from both of us via our podcast. And when your book comes out, what is the title going to be? Do you have
Master Your Mind, Master Your Life.
I love it. Beautiful, brother. Beautiful. I love you,
Easy,
my friend.
simple thing to cover. Just mastery of the mind. No big deal.
Phenomenal. All right, we're out.
Yep.